So thank you everybody for joining us today. This meeting is being recorded. My name is Althea Walker. I'm the Tribal Climate Science Liaison for the American Indian Higher Education Consortium at the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. And happy to be hosting this meeting today. Thank you for joining us and the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group, preparing future generations of American Indian, Alaska Native geoscience professionals, educators, and workforce. And there's a few of us who have been meeting over the last few weeks to bring this gathering together. So thank you on behalf of AHEC, Haskell, the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, and the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center. So just a couple announcements that I wanted to make. The next meeting or this next gathering will be on June 11th at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 4 p.m. Eastern, in which the discussion will be around research needs and opportunities. Please subscribe to the Southwest CASC newsletter or the North Central CASC newsletter to receive future notifications of these meetings. And we'll also be going through listservs like Rising Voices, the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, and social media. So just be on the lookout for the next meetings and the information to join us. And there is an upcoming webinar on May 20th at the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center we'll be hosting, if Stefan wanted to give a quick update on that.
Sure, yeah, I actually posted a link in the chat. So if people are interested, you can register in the chat box. Our guest speaker is Shasta Gauguin from the Palo Band of Mission Indians. She's going to talk about her climate change program.
All right, thank you, Stefan. Okay, so we will get right into the presentations by Dr. Dan Wildcat, Sharina Baker, and Paulette Blanchard. So I will turn it over to Dr. Wildcat. And thank you everybody for joining us.
Okay, yes. Passant, Selagi, Zoyaha, Yuchiha, Boshita Adene. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Wildcat. I'm a Yuchi member of the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma, and I cannot tell you how delighted I am that we're entertaining this restart, this next chapter of the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group. The energy is just infectious when you're around all the people that have been a part of this for so long. So I think at this point you're looking at my slides, I hope. And so I'm not a slide person, so this is going to be very, very simple. But I thought it would be good to put something out here, and there'll be more pictures than anything else. So please submit questions, follow along, let me know if you've got questions. So let's see how I get this slide to move forward.
Down at the bottom left of your screen, if you just click some, there's the arrows.
There we go.
Got it.
Okay, and now I need to go back the other way. Okay, here we go. I think it's working now. So I want to say that the working group was ultimately about honoring our mindfulness of who we are as Indigenous peoples, our relationship to our places, that symbiotic relationship that really made us who we are as unique Indigenous peoples. And I think that's really what the working group, the Tribal College and University Centered Working Group, brings to the geosciences. Of course, my mentor and colleague and co-author Vine Deloria, one of his last essays, he talked about human maturity. And he made the point that humankind's maturity is impossible unless you are attentive. You must be attentive. It is impossible if you're not paying attention. And I think that's really the strength of our indigenous traditions. So this is the kind of slide you don't ever want to put in a presentation because the print's too small to read. So I summarize the basic points. What you'll see here is what came out of a meeting. The Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group started in 2006 at a meeting held at Haskell between June 19th and 22nd. And at that time, what came out of that meeting was the American Indian and Alaska Native Climate Change Working Group. So everything you're going to see in this red paper that was formulated by a bunch of people who came together, about 30 people came together. We set out goals at the end of the meeting. And this was our first goal. We want to prepare generations of American Indian, Alaska Native geoscience professionals, educators, and a geoscience literate American Indian, Alaska Native workforce. I think that's still relevant. I could be wrong, but that's what I'd like to discuss and hear about today. The second goal that came out of our red paper was we wanted to ensure that indigenous tribal knowledges of our landscapes and climates are valued, respected, used, and incorporated in our tribal exercise of geoscience, education, and research. Again, very relevant. I think we have so much that we can learn, but we also have a lot to contribute about a deep sense of place, a deep sense of connectedness to a landscape or a seascape. The third goal was to really work to establish collaborative relationships between federal agencies, tribal colleges, tribes, to make sure that geoscience education and research opportunities for American Indians and Alaska Natives were integrated and coordinated. This is a question. Is there a need for this group? Do we need a tribal college and university-centered group that can sort of advance creating our own geoscience professionals? I'll leave that for us to discuss and to decide. Finally, we want to advance all of the above goals in our backyard using the best technologies we can bring to bear, but working in our communities and on our native lands. I think we want to make sure that what we bring to this research effort, this education effort, is a respect for relatives and the relationships that are a part very much of our worldview. Those relatives extend beyond just human relatives, but our relatives, the plants, the animals, the air, the water, the life that constitutes the larger communities that we recognize we are an important but one small part of. I think that's what's exciting about the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group. And a little bit about that, it was people like Oren Lyons, who at the 25th anniversary of Earth Day, gave a compelling speech about how the Onondaga don't talk about resources. They talk about relatives. And how so many of our elders who have preceded us on these paths through institutions of higher education and research organizations, like Dr. Henrietta Mann, just an incredible speaker. She's been a guest at many of the working group meetings in the past, but, she points out that, we don't argue about religion. We don't argue about spirituality because we know we were all spiritual beings before we came into this physical being. That's an important idea. That's something that bears on how we look at our relationship to the earth, the land, the air, and the water. Robin Kimmerer, what an incredible scientist. Those of you that are familiar with her work knows that she's argued that the best models we have for how to live sustainably and well as human beings are given to us by nature itself. And I think that's really an important point. We can bring that to bear. Of course, the late John Mohawk, what an incredible scholar. I still use one of his seminal texts, Animal Nation's Right to Survive, where he argued that, you know, this is one of the distinctions between our worldviews and the dominant worldview is that we honor the balance of life beyond ourselves as relatives, as possessing personhood. And that's pretty incredible, because if you think about it, that means you have to start thinking about responsibilities you have. Oh, I tell you, I could not say enough about Oscar. What an incredible human being. I wanted to make sure Oscar's picture was here. He was at that first meeting, and that meeting was just me calling together a bunch of people I had met through the years, my years at Haskell, and the forming of the HER Center, the Haskell Environmental Research Studies Center. And, you know, Oscar came and he was fighting cancer. And he ultimately lost that battle and started his journey to the stars. But he came to that meeting, presented a paper, and was an inspiration to all of us, and emphasizing how important our indigenous knowledges and our languages are to us contributing to geosciences. And just incredible. That communication piece, Dennis Martinez, some of you know Dennis. Dennis, really an interdisciplinary scholar, an earth scientist, biologist, an ecologist, environmental scientist. Really, you know, he talked about the importance of us developing models where we weren't just talking about ecosystem restoration, but eco-cultural restoration, that really in our traditions, when we think about restoration, we're thinking about those relationships between that ecosystem health and our human health, and the fact that those are symbiotically related. Of course, Suzanne Schoen-Harjo, one of my Creek relatives and an advocate for honoring our sacred lands, incredible work through the years. Crosland Smith, traditional knowledge holder among the Cherokee, participant in working group activities. What I want to say is this, and I don't want to go over my time limit. What I want to say is the following. I want to say that it's been now almost 14 years since that first meeting that created this idea of a tribal college and university centered climate change working group. It's kind of been in abeyance for several years. And I want to thank many of you who are on this webinar, and particularly AHEC and Al Kuzlikas and people for coming to me and saying, hey, what about the working group? Maybe it's time to get that started again. Well, I think we'll find out, you know, now. Is it time? Is this something? Are those 4 goals still important to us and things that we need to think about advancing? I'm kind of starting to feel like it is. It is time for a new chapter of the working group. Billy Frank, many of you met Billy when we had our working group meeting at Northwest Indian College. What an inspiration, and a person who led the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission for years, and again, think of him often. I think what I want to see the working group entertain is, if we decide to move forward, create this entity again, that we make sure our culture is the foundation for what we work from. Of course, the late Albert Whitehat, again, a good friend to the climate change working group. Raylene Kawaia, who I met in Hawaii and the Big Island in I think it was 2012, 2013, when, by the way, one of her relatives, M. Kalani Sousa, was responsible for building that bridge between the American Indian Alaska Native Climate Change Working Group and our Pacific Island relatives that made us at a meeting that really Paulette Blanchard was responsible for putting together at the University of Oklahoma at the National Weather Center back in 2011, where after meeting Kalani and deciding, hey, we need to really be working together, we decided, I believe it was at that meeting, that we were no longer going to be the American Indian Alaska Native Climate Change Working Group, but that we would be the other IPCC, the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group. And so a little bit of history there. Sharina and Paulette were both a part of that, as were many of you that are probably watching. But I think we've got something to offer and something to gain by coming together. Bill Tallbull, one of the first elders who I put on an advisory board for the HERS Center, what an incredible scholar, deep thinker, and a man rooted in his Cheyenne traditions. So, and last but not least, my dear aunt, Josephine Bigler. She started her journey to the stars, but she lived to see the Yuchi language program start in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, where my dad didn't live to see this happen, but where several years ago at our Yuchi fair, I actually saw a young man get up and tell a complete and perform a Yuchi story. Never thought I would see that, but in our language. And it was beautiful. We have a lot to share. So I think, again, I think what we can do is start a discussion. As M. Kalani Sousa likes to say, some minds are always better than one mind. Let's bring a lot of good minds together and see what good we can make happen. I'm so delighted to see so many faces and names of people I've met through the years, and I'm going to stop now and let these two fantastic young Indigenous scholars and women take the balance of this program. But as you can see, I guess I'm a little bit excited about this. I hope the rest of you are too. I think there's some good work that can be accomplished. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dan. Okay. Let me see. Slideshow. Can everybody see my screen? Thumbs up? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, Ayuki, my name is Sharina Baker. I'm half Southern Ute and half Karuk. And I am a Haskell alumni. I got my master's in Indigenous Studies. I got my master's in Indigenous Studies from the University of Kansas, and now I'm currently working on my PhD in the Education Department in the Language Literacy Social Cultural Studies with an emphasis on American Indian education. So I created this PowerPoint not to just talk about my involvement with the working group, but also the involvement of students, tribal college students that were previously in the working group and have developed their professionalism with the help of the working group. Here are a few flyers that we have created over the past, but what this represents to me is all the different places that we have had these meetings. For example, this one, the one
with the hand holding the world, that was it Tohono O'odham. The middle one was in Anchorage, Alaska. And the other one was at Haskell, but that was with the teamwork with the Indigenous Environmental Network. So the first highlight student is Barbara Wolfen. I got a quote or advice or their favorite memory, but I want to highlight their work. So I will be reading from my other screen. While interning for Dr. Wildcat at Haskell, I assisted with 3 Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group meetings, the New Orleans, Albuquerque, and Lawrence. Also, we started a pilot program, Eco Ambassadors, at Haskell Tribal Eco Ambassadors Organization, which had 2 parts, recycling and environmental research team for the Haskell wetlands. After graduation, she returned home and was voted in to serve on Pitt River Council for 11 months, and then was accepted into the Indigenous Master's Program at the University of Auckland, New Zealand, and she graduated from there and returned home with her master's. So now what she is doing, she said within her first year of being home, she was asked by Tribal Council to be the interim tribal administrator until the position was filled. I held the interim position for 4 months and loved it. My experience, education, and networks have helped me be successful in this position. I was able to call or message professors and friends to assist with knowledge, experience, and guidance. Currently, I sit on the Pitt River Education Committee, American Indian Advisory Committee, and Shasta County and Curriculum Committee. She has utilized the works of her networks from the Climate Change Working Group. She said, while at the National Education Conference in Chicago, Dr. Wildcat introduced 4 of us Haskell students to Maury Professor, who was also a presenter at the conference. I attended his presentation and learned about the integration of Maury language within the curriculum at the universities. After sitting in the presentation, I was definitely setting on attending the school in, I have a hard time pronouncing it, Aotearoa. One of her mentors, Jay Johnson from the Haskell Environmental Research Studies, who's also a professor at the University of Kansas. She said that they were introduced, and he got her to apply. And so she said without that introduction, she would not have been so successful in her educational career. And this is the quote that I put up there: without the introduction of the Maury Professor and the guidance of Dr. Jay Johnson, I would have not known about the possibilities of obtaining Indigenous Studies master degree. Yeah, so I'm gonna go on to the next one. She is amazing, and I can't wait to see what she does in the future. So Tyler Kimbrell, he was another HERS student as well. So I really like his quote. He said, for me, the working group was critical in 2 ways. It cultivated a sense of community and the interactions you have to build your confidence. He says being integrated with intellectuals and professionals helped his professional development. And so right now he's currently he got his Master's of Arts in Communication Studies. He's now working on his PhD in progress for Communication Studies, and he is Creek. And he also is teaching at Haskell. So next is Kelda Britton. So Kelda Britton, she's a Walaki, Nomalaki, and Concow descendant of the Round Valley Indian Reservation in Coblo, California. She said she's the first generation college graduate, and she attributes so much of that to Haskell Indian Nations University. It was during her bachelor's degree program where she participated in the Haskell Environmental Research Studies internship with Dr. Wildcat in this capacity. I had the opportunity to develop and research projects in relation to her own community, which is very important. She said the working group gave her a new understanding about the effects of climate change in communities across the world. And she said, as a matter of fact, when they went to Alaska, her first visit, she was insistently captured by the beauty and the people. And she said, as I recall, having a conversation with the Alaska Native elder outside of the hotel. She was telling me about her way of life, hunting, moosing, trapping, picking berries, and growing up on the land. She was amazed and inspired by her words. She said, I will probably never see her again, but she opened doors for her that will forever be grateful. So I really like this point because not only are we working with professionals, but when we go to different tribal lands, we understand the importance of all the people that come. So just because they're not a tribal student or even a person that is in a higher profession, but we invite the whole community to come. And so I think that's one of the most important things. I have a personal story of my own. This lady, when we went to Salish Kootenai College, she inspired me so much. She was an elder and we let her, she asked if she could set up and sell jewelry at our conference. And we were like, yeah, like, why not? Like, come on in. So her and her daughter came in and they set up, and it was just so nice just to sit there because I was doing registration, and I was a project coordinator for the American Indian Alaska Native Climate Change Working Group. That was before it was the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group. Sorry, I didn't add that. And so it was just the outside community of the whole, it just brought the whole working group together. It just brought so many people together. And I love that she included in her piece about a lady that wasn't even a part of the working group. She was just around the area and how she inspired her. So furthermore, let's see, she said she found herself living, she said, 3 years after, I found myself living in a small village in interior Alaska, working on a project, and ended up staying and living in the village for another 3 years. And she recently completed her master's degree in environmental and community at Humboldt State University. And she's currently working home in her community where she is teaching natural resource management, CTE classes, and Native American studies at the high school. So I'm so proud of her. So finally, here's Abby, and Makakwa Abigail Jones. Oh, I forgot her. Did I do her quote? Sorry. Okay, so this is what I included in the, sorry, I'm going back to Kelda. She said in 2013, oh, nope, never mind. I did that. Okay. So finally we come to Makakwa Abigail Jones. And this was her advice for students that are interested in joining in the working group. She said, take every opportunity you can while attending school, both internships and being a voice for your community. From what I have learned is that sometimes your voice is the only voice that some scholars get to hear when it comes to learning about Indian country. And I can completely contest to this. As a scholar myself, I sometimes have been the only Native American in my class, and I'm constantly speaking up in these spaces. I'm occupying these spaces that were not made for us, in a sense. You know, they were actually made to keep the oppressed people oppressed. So the fact that we are now occupying these spaces that weren't made for us is complete change and a complete shift within our education system. And I think the working group as well is a complete huge part of that, because we're bringing all this knowledge to things that people haven't even thought about. So now that we're putting it in their faces, like, yeah, this is an option, this is something as well to think about. Now they're expanding their horizons, and the curriculum for the whole like academic world has been shifted by powerful, beautiful minds of Indigenous peoples. But I want to get back to Abigail, because she is one of the most amazing women I've ever met. And I love her story. I met her, oh gosh, 2007 or 2008. But this is what she has to say. My focus on the working group research was climate-induced relocation of tribes. After receiving my associate's degree in Indigenous and American Indian Studies from Haskell, my dual bachelor's degree in government and Native American Studies from Dartmouth. I graduated with my Master's of Environmental Law and Policy degree from the #1 ranked environmental law program at Vermont Law School. And so I want to go back to her thing about Dartmouth. So if she had mentioned, if it was not for Dan's work networks, which I feel Dan's networks are all of our networks, and I feel that my networks are his networks. So that is one of the most beautiful things about the working group, is that you just have to speak up. You just have to voice, like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Hey, I have this idea. And all you got to do is tell one of us from the working group, and bam, it happens like that. Your idea becomes a dissertation. It becomes a master's, and it's just the connections we make. It's that easy. And that's one of the things I really, really want to emphasize about the working group, of how you can turn just a simple idea into your career, into changing life ways, or like into changing into a more positive situation for your tribe, for tribal communities. I know a lot of tribes don't only go back to their tribes and work; they actually go to other places and they've expanded their horizons, and they create more networks. It's just a huge cluster of networks when you join the working group, and I cannot emphasize that enough. But I want to keep telling Abigail's story, because her story does not end with her education. She is amazing. She had a full ride to Dartmouth, and they even paid for her family. They relocated her entire family. She was pregnant at the time. She actually, I believe she was in labor when she was on a call on her interview to get into the school, or it was on I'm not exactly sure what it was, but she was in labor at that time. Like, this woman is amazing. She has proved time and time again, gender does not matter. She can do it. Oh gosh, she's just amazing. So I will continue. So now she says she's an environmental technician and was working for her tribal planning and environmental protection department on nonprofit source pollution, GIS, and wetland programs. Currently, she is involved in local and state politics, trying to develop effective climate policies at the grassroots level. The partnerships of the working group were crucial for me in that I participated in internships at the National Science Foundation, NASA, and the National Center of Atmospheric Research. The various partners and opportunities taught me the skills needed to communicate with the variety of stakeholders when it comes to desperate community impacts of climate change, such as enhancing the Kansas Democratic Party platform to include environmental health and human health. So during her term on the Lawrence, Kansas Sustainability Advisory Board, we have created a climate change subcommittee and secured funding to update the Lawrence Climate Action Plan. As the chair of the subcommittee, she is in charge of leading the initiative to include climate change in the City of Lawrence strategic plans. She also founded she also founded and chairs the Kansas Democratic Party Native American Caucus. Our goals are to inform and elect leaders that are tribal and environmentally focused. She sits on numerous boards, such as the Kansas Association for Conservation and Environmental Education and the National Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, Diversity and Inclusion External Advisory Board. She hopes to provide a voice for Indian country when it comes to the mainstream environmental dialogue. And she said, last but not least, as the chair of the Kansas Democratic Party's Native American Caucus, I consult of local campaigns when it comes to Kansas tribal and environmental issues. And then she also said, if you want to start bragging, this is one of the books she was one of her published works that she has done. And she's in the story. I wanted to get an example of it, but I didn't have time of an insert of her part, but I didn't. So I added this is when we were in Alaska, there's Kelda, and I'm on there as well, but this is one of the times we went there. And I'm adding these pictures because one of the best things that come out of it, I know that during this time of coronavirus and whatnot, traveling is not a big part of it, but hopefully soon that will in turn change, and we can go back to traveling to all these different lands and understanding that where we come from is not as more important as where other people come from, and that we can share this collective of environmental issues and impacts, climate change impacts, and come up with something great. Because as far as I know, there's been so much that has come out of these working groups. This was at Native Peoples Native Homelands. There's Abby, and she was pregnant. This was in Alaska as well, a big group of students from all over. And I wanted to end with this. This is Abby and Brandon Johnson. This was taken at the Northwest Indian College in Bellingham, Washington. And I wanted to end it with this picture because this is just represents a small little piece or a small picture of like what really comes out of the working group, and it's our families. You know, we really we can't choose sometimes who our families are, but our blood families, but we can choose the people, our circle around us, and we just uplift each other. And this is such a good picture that represents, it has the poster in the background of students and their work, and it just shows us like we are so happy. And these are just good memories to me. You know, I went on my Facebook and went through my timeline of all the like pictures I had, and Brandon is one of my good friends. Abby's one of my good friends. We still keep in contact, and we just created this family out of the working group. And that's one of the things I really wanted to share, is that when you open yourself up to these opportunities and you open yourself up to advancing and enhancing your life through education and anything, like you don't even, I know students that didn't continue their education, but they went back home and they utilized the knowledge that they did have from the working group, or even the communities, just them showing up to the meeting, and they are not students or professionals, but they still have a voice within these places. We let everyone speak, and we let everybody become family. It's very, very rare that we have a bad taste in our mouth when it comes to certain people. Very, very rare. And I just want to end it with that I'm excited that we've brought this back up to conversation to have. I think it's very critical. I think it's crucial that this needs to happen, just based on my experience with the working group. And I was just the logistics person. Like, I was the project coordinator. I wasn't one of the students. I wasn't one of the professionals, but I was the behind the scenes person. And I got to hear from NASA or Nancy Maynard, and oh my gosh, like so many people. I got to meet Henrietta Mann. I got to meet all these people in my American Indian Studies writings, and the articles and the books that I've read. I got to meet the people that I idolized, that I got to read just through, you know, showing up to these meetings. And it was just beautiful. And that's where I want to end it. And thank you guys all for giving me this space to share my story and the stories of students that the working group has really impacted or enhanced their lives. So thank you. Yotua.
Thank you, Sharina.
Niwi kiniki noki nahali wa la miki niho wa sikapi wi yalnola ni dasito hoa hotawi piwesi shawani. My name is Paulette Blanchard. Hello, my friends and relatives. I'm glad to see you. I'm absentee Shawnee. I am a graduate student at the University of Kansas, and I am a UCAR fellow at the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research. I got introduced to the working group through Makokwa, and once Dan became my advisor at Haskell, my mentor, he never got out of the job. And so for me, I'm really grateful that we've set a stage of where the working group came out of, and then how it's leveraged the lives of the participants in many ways. And so I want to kind of reflect on, you know, where we've been, where we are, where we're going, and why all this matters. So, you know, Dan had mentioned that it came out of Native Peoples' Native Homelands in 2006. And this is incredibly important because if you had read either of the, or both of the Native Peoples' Native Homelands that Nancy Maynard was instrumental in creating, it was an opportunity for Natives' voices to be elevated in the discussion of climate change, adaptation, mitigation, policy, and so on and so forth. And so this opportunity for me to participate in a group that addressed climate was unique because I'd never really considered it before. When I was at Haskell, I was interested in federal Indian law and policy and found myself in climate. So one of the important things about the working group is that most of the meetings have been held at tribal colleges. Now, why is this important? Well, oftentimes institutions and agencies and organizations try very hard to get students to meetings or conferences or what have you, but very rarely do these conferences come to the institutions for the tribal colleges or of the tribal colleges, so that these tribal students on a larger scale can be introduced to climate science, earth sciences in general, practitioners of sciences, meet some of their mentors, some of their heroes, some of the people of the work that they cite and read, as well as become inspired to consider a new career path that they might not have considered prior. So when you take these spaces, when you take the working group to a space like a tribal college and then rotate it around, you're introducing multiple tribal college students to this unique STEM discipline, but also you're bringing these institutions and organizations representatives to the tribal colleges so that they can see the needs that are at these tribal colleges, build relationships which are critically important with faculty and tribal college administrators, and contribute to programs that bolster and empower not only the tribal college students, but the community that these colleges often support, these Native communities, because often students are interested in solving problems that are place-based, often in their communities. So when they do pick a research project, it's often very relevant and very close to home and personal for them, because often these environmental impacts or climate shifts and changes and variabilities impact these students in ways that these needs are immediate to address. And so often they go to school to try to address these issues. So what does it do for these students? Well, not only does it give them often a career and an interest and an opportunity to go into a discipline they might not otherwise have considered, but they have an opportunity to meet people in places that can help elevate, empower, not just foster, but fund sometimes their educational goals. And if you want tribal college students to go on to universities for master's and PhD programs, they need to have those bridges, they need to have that support, they need to have these connections. So while it sounds nice to have a working group meeting at a larger meeting, the reality is to really do the grassroots work and to build the relationships necessary with these tribal colleges and these tribal college students requires the working group to be in these different tribal colleges. And often these colleges are willing to host, but the need to support that from outside institutions and agencies, like NOAA has always been wonderful. Bill Thomas with NOAA has always been super wonderful. Nancy Maynard with NASA. I know that UCAR-NCAR wants to support and contribute to making these kinds of meetings happen. And so these relationships are multifaceted, they're reciprocal, and the relationships are important, the relevance of the research, and the relatedness between people and places, all critical to advancing science, to addressing the needs in community. And so all of these things support the tribal needs, these meetings, because not only does the meeting being held in a community that often can be depressed, these meetings bring money either in the hotels or restaurants or whatever. And so also supporting the research needs can often contribute to some larger research programs or projects that can really benefit tribal communities, as well as the tribal college and tribal students. So we're talking about relationships with institutions and science practitioners. This is all important because not only these relationships, but the cultural competency of people that come into these communities. It can't be an extractive relationship. This has to be, like I said, reciprocity. There has to be, both groups benefiting. And honestly, the group that needs to benefit most are the tribal students, the tribal colleges, and the institutions need to pony up. They have the privilege, they have the power, they have the agency. So now this is an opportunity for them to give back. And this is one great way to do it. And it's incredibly important that the working group be revitalized, because no one else is doing this. No one else has a relationship with the tribal colleges the way that Haskell has built through the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group. Nobody else is trusted in Indian country the way the working group has been with TCUs, because there's well over 10 years of relationship. It's Dan Wildcat, everybody loves Dan. Sharina has built these incredible networks and relationships, and as have I, and we maintain those relationships. Another important reason that having these types of meetings at the TCUs is we need to support Indigenous science methodologies as well as methods. If we are not supporting our Indigenous ways of knowing, all we're doing is perpetuating settler colonialism. Science, education, and religion are the three branches of assimilation. And if we are not addressing Indigenous ways of knowing and doing, and using science, our science as legitimate, and supporting that, we're just assimilating into the settler colonial system and perpetuating a system that's A, broken, and B, that doesn't represent us or serve us. So it's incredibly important that we perpetuate these Indigenous science methods and methodologies in community, as well as working with things like tribal IRBs. How do we protect data sovereignty? And, talking about things that 10, 20 years ago were ideas, but now they're actual methods that people are utilizing. And groups like NSF are actually funding more and more research projects that tribes say, we own this data. We'll share with you what we find is acceptable, but there's certain parts that we won't. And NSF has even, agreed with some of these things. So moving forward, there are funding agencies that are respecting these relationships and these sovereign rights of data, of traditional knowledges, and respecting that respect of the relationship and in science is important. So I think that one of the many of these valuable points, the Indigenous People Climate Change Working Group is unique because no one else has these relationships with the TCUs already, has the trust, has done so much to help as many tribal college students as they can, as the working group has. Because every time we went to a new TCU, or whether it was Flathead Reservation, Salish Kootenai, or Northwest Indian College, or wherever we went, we made new friends, and we've kept those friends. And we still utilize those relationships whenever there's a research need, whenever there's if, like, I've called Sharina and said, hey, I'm gonna be in town for this, this event, can I come see you? And those relationships are maintained. And I think the working group has built these kinds of incredible, in-depth and positive relationships. And it's because of the mentoring. Let's go to this next one. It's because of the mentoring that these relationships have, and the work and the drive and the hope that we have to continue into academia has been nourished and supported and maintained. I myself, I was at Haskell in my senior year, and after doing the HERS program, I had this idea of trying to understand how tribes in Oklahoma experience climate change. And through the HERS program, I found out there was no data. So I ended up with the support of the working group and Kiksapa at the time, who was the Bull Bennett and Kiksapa was the author of the National Climate Assessment chapter in 2014. I got this crazy idea to have an intertribal meeting on climate variability and change, and got 22 out of 39 tribes in Oklahoma to come talk about climate for the first time. And that report that came out of that meeting was one of the technical inputs for the region that was cited in the National Climate Assessment. So here's an instance where the work that comes out of Haskell actually creates technical input on something so big as the National Climate Assessment. I, at the time, had no idea, no clue what any of that meant. I was just like, oh, cool. And that got me recruited to the University of Oklahoma, got me, you know, on the path that I am, you know, working with the National Center for Atmospheric Research, being part of Rising Voices for 8 years at the, you know, with UCAR, NCAR. And so my point is that these types of spaces where we have opportunities and networking and soft professional skill building and relationship building and people that we can trust to mentor us through a space that is not made for us, not created for us, working in a science that often denies us and tries to erase us. And like Sharina said, you know, occupying these spaces and being empowered to do the work that's not only important, but relevant and needs to be done. So it's super exciting to be part of this. And so science is often talking about, you know, not just science, but many institutions are talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and mentoring. You know, I talked about the differences in institutions. You know, we have NOAA and NASA and UCAR, NCAR, and they all seem to have a Native outreach coordinator. They all have to, you know, have a program to try to be more diverse, and often they are still struggling. Well, that's why you work with tribal colleges directly. That's why you build relationships with the 36 TCUs that are across the United States. These two pictures here, the one on top is from SIPI, when we were at SIPI. The one at the bottom was when we were at Dartmouth. So, you know, we had these opportunities to travel around and to see these different places and to see the work that Native students and Native faculty are doing in their institutions was mind-blowing, because we often spend so much time in these high science spaces like AGU and whatever, that we don't get to see some of the really in-depth, like just legitimately real on the ground powerful work that's being done in the TCUs. And I think that that is an under-tapped resource, as well as the faculty don't get the support, as much support as they deserve. And this is an opportunity for institutions and agencies and science practitioners to build up these TCUs and to nurture these relationships and so on and so forth. These meetings often create graduate opportunities to recruit, to meet some of the people at institutions you're interested in working with. Mentors. I cannot talk enough about mentors. Had I not had some of the mentors I've had in my life, I would never have made it through my master's program, because oftentimes Native students are leveraged as diversity points, or they're exploited, or they get with a mentor that has never worked with a Native student, so has no idea of the cultural aspects, the historical components, the traumas even. And so until we start having more culturally competent advisors and stuff, we need these Native mentors and these ally mentors that are skilled in working with Native students specifically. They can not only help them navigate the academic system, but the financial system, as well as help them understand how to be professional, how to protect themselves, and how to protect their community often. So TCU support in STEM. There's just not, I mean, the funding it's a struggle at tribal colleges. And I think that the universities that have MOUs with these TCUs should be having a better relationship with them. And I think when we have these working group meetings at TCUs, often these big institutions want to come and sit in and listen and maybe hopefully build better bridges and relationships. These working group meetings create safe spaces for Native students to talk and network and meet mentors, consider graduate school, ask other students about their experiences, and it's super important to have a safe space for Native students to do Native science that's relevant and that isn't ridiculed and that is supported both by Native scholars and ally scholars that understand that, you know, there's not science isn't singular. Science is often just a method, but there are multiple methods to observing and understanding and testing, and, you know, so it's important. Students, these students that participate in these working groups on panels or in poster sessions or on a, you know, Dan Wildcat threw me on a panel the first time. I wasn't even prepared. But it helps us with these, the presenting, learning to speak publicly, learning to not say 1,000 times. Making a poster, presenting a poster. I mean, making a poster for me was the hardest part. Talking with potential faculty and funders and knowing what to ask and what, you know, ideas you might want to share to potentially create a research project. Writing coaches. Oh my God, I have the most amazing writing coach from UCAR right now. And I can't tell you enough how grateful I am, because, you know, Haskell, I love it. It works so hard to get many students up to speed, and it's so busy doing so many things that writing was not my skill that I picked up the easiest or the best, and I still struggle with it. So having a writing coach in these institutional spaces, it's critical. And I think that the working group might be a space where we can build these kinds of better relationships, where people can reach out to peers or mentors or other faculty to help them, you know, read a work or write a letter of recommendation or what have you, and then applying for the funding opportunities. So the working group is more than just talking about climate change, because when we do get together, we do usually have themed meetings. Each place that we've always been to has its own issue going on in their region. So often it was important to create a theme around like water, drought, animals even, you know. So when we had these working group meetings in place, whatever was going on in that community often became the theme that we would look to build around and have panels and support the students that, you know, at that university that were doing the research in this specific area to talk and to share and to present. And so we always talked about climate, but there was always so much, it was so much bigger than the discussions about climate. And so another fun thing was that every time we went to a new tribal college, not only was it amazing and it looked cool, we got to see new people, try new foods, learn new cultural differences between us, but we got to learn about the different problems within place and place-specific issues and place-specific solutions can be diversified with, you know, people from other places with potentially similar situations that maybe have solved a problem in their space that might be an opportunity or a solution to implement in a new place. And while they not like one size, we know one size does not fit all, the working group always was a space where we could explore other people's ideas, their research thoughts, their concerns, the place problems, the place solutions, the grandmas, the grandpas, the foods, the babies. I mean, there was always kids running around half the time, and that intergenerational relationship too was part of it. You know, I mean, if you see in these pictures, and I'm sorry the bottom one is blurry, you know, we've got a diversity of people, of age groups, of where these all these people come from somewhere different, and it's just, if it doesn't continue, it would be a tragedy. I really believe that, because you've seen some of the success that Sharina spoke of, and that's just a small sample. There are so many more students that have gone on to careers in either science or social science or tribal government, tribal policy making, that I can't emphasize enough the value of supporting the tribal colleges and tribal students in this way. So on that, Yahweh, I thank you and turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Paulette. So we'll go into questions, discussion. You can either enter it into the chat box, or if your video is on, raise your hand. So yeah. Any last thoughts? No? Let's see, where's the chat box? So there will be, oh, go ahead, Michael.
I just have a few things to say. First, I'm really glad that these meetings are starting back up, especially now that I can be a mentor and start using the connections that I've made that I can bring back to this, because it's given me so much. But I also want to say I'm not the only one. It doesn't have to just fall on Sharina and Paulette. I think during my tenure with HERS and the American Indian, or the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group, there were some 60 students that went through the HERS program. I want to say 45 of them went on to graduate school. Those are people we can tap into. So I think it's time to start thinking about bringing the next generation in. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else? Al?
Yeah, hi, thanks for calling on me. I think I accidentally activated my video. I think this is a fantastic overview. Thank you very much to all three speakers about the importance of the working group and the possibilities for moving forward. One thing that I would just invite a conversation, maybe it's a little too late to do it now, but the idea of how the climate adaptation science centers can be a strong partner in helping to identify projects for students to get involved with, provide a source of mentoring around specific climate change issues. It just seems like now is a really good time, given that we have this relationship between AHEC, the CASCs, and tribal communities, that you know, we really need to harvest that that set of relationships that are already there and rekindle, unless they're already, most of them are already there, I'm sure, the ones that were established by the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group that were described in those presentations. So I'm just excited. I think this is a really good time to do this work of regenerating the working group.
There was a question from Andrew. He says, hi, everyone. People are right. This is an incredibly valuable group, especially for student involvement. Any ideas for in-person gatherings when life returns to normal?
This is Dan. Can you hear me? I think
Yes.
so. I think the short answer is we would like to have in-person meetings, obviously. And yes, so that's, in fact, we were thinking about having a meeting in late August. Althea might have some updates on whether that's going to happen, but there was an Indigenous Peoples and Tribal Lands meeting that's getting ready, that was planned for late August. I think Minneapolis, is that right, Althea?
I believe it's in Minnesota somewhere. And anybody from ITAP, if you're on, Anne Marie, if you wanted to give an update on the National Tribal Indigenous Climate Conference.
And so the short answer is yes, we'd like to do that. Obviously, we're going to be very cautious. And in the meantime, we'll try to create some welcoming virtual spaces to have this discussion and move it forward. But thanks for the question, and I agree totally with Paulette. The idea will be, once we get this reconstituted, if that's what people feel like we should do, we'll start moving around to different tribal colleges and having these meetings. That is the real payoff. Get our federal partners, we've got such great partners in the past, get them on tribal college campuses. And that's a little different landscape than maybe what some of those potential allies are used to. And so I think that's really important.
We have a question. Oh, go ahead, Paulette.
I was gonna say, and if I may too, one of the challenges, we talk about creating space for Native scholars, but there's often not a lot of discussion about what happens after we graduate and what kind of jobs will be available and where do we fit. This kind of program creates that opportunity for that discussion, for one, but it also creates an opportunity to hire more Native scholars and PhD holders and Native scientists to do outreach for institutions, for one, to represent communities as best as they can in these science spaces, but also to advocate to create more space to hire more Native scientists. And that's important because there's not enough. They talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but you can't add one brown and stir and it's diverse space, because Natives are just as diverse as Europeans. You know, we all have different languages and have different place relationships. So it's important that we recognize that we can't just talk about diversity as an abstract, but we have to be committed to filling these spaces with Native scholars. And that starts in these institutions, and recruitment happens in these kinds of spaces, and relationships matter, and cultural competency is critical. So, and identity is critical, because, you know, all these things matter, and it's a tough space already, but if we have safe mentors and people that can guide, it'll just get better for everyone.
And there's a question from Anne Marie along those lines to all the panelists. What is one recommendation you would give to help a young professional that is just graduating with this new climate? Thanks for having this webinar. Great to see and hear from you all.
So my recommendation would be to reach out to those relatives, those relations you built professionally, and don't let the fact that we're in a very strange situation now, and really a dangerous situation with this COVID virus, don't let it keep you from putting out, you know, information about your work, your interest, what you're doing. In some ways, people may have more time now to look at a vita, a resume, because they're not out of doors necessarily. And so I would say really take advantage of trying to use all the networks you can to get that information out, your resumes, your vitas, your interests. Let people know what your research interests are. And there might be some real opportunities right now because of the situation that we're in. People are spending a lot more time looking at their computers than they have. I know I have than I ever have in my life. So anyway, that's my advice.
Paulette or Sharina, did you want to chime in on that question?
Yeah, I can. So to kind of reiterate what Dr. Wildcat said, yes, it's important to utilize like the networks we do have now, to utilize your voice now virtually. But I think this whole coronavirus pandemic has actually created a new situation for us, that this should be one of the focuses we actually, at our next meeting or our next virtual meeting, whatever it takes, but we need to talk about these types of things. Like how can we create these jobs virtually? Because, you know, how can we just create a hub where some student can say, hey, I've been working on this, my undergraduate or my master's, PhD, and right now I'm struggling. So how could we create a place for them? You know, this is something that's a really, really good question, because this is something that we need to put on our radar, that this is a need. And we don't know, we didn't foresee this. Nobody foreseen that we're going to be having our meetings virtually, that we're going to be homeschooling our children, that we have all these other responsibilities that we are talking about. If we look at the Navajo Nation, like I'm working in education, I'm writing a paper currently right now talking about like, yeah, we can look at the education that's happening, but right now, like some people don't have time for that. Like we're trying to survive. We're trying to see what we have. We have, if you do a comparison between West Virginia and the Navajo Nation, like, okay, they have 63 grocery stores in West Virginia, same square, or like a little bit less than Navajo Nation square mileage of land. And then we look at the Navajo Nation, they have what, 13 grocery stores, they have 6 hospitals, and they have like how many hospitals over there? You know, we need to bring these into the light, bring these into the forefront of why are these things happening? Like this virus is a part of our change. You know, it's not just the climate. Yeah, the climate's probably getting a little bit better, but what is the effects of that? You know, these are the conversations. We're constantly, this world is changing constantly. This, you know, our people are changing, our children, you know, the development, we're constantly having new, we need the voices of these Indigenous peoples to really show us what's happening, because right now we are, it's so new. And when it comes to jobs and things, this could be creating jobs, or we could help create jobs. We can help further their education. We could help find so many cases that I know of that funding is like, oh, you need help funding? Let me talk to this person. Let me talk to that person, you know, like, don't stop there. Let's keep going. Like, let's just, like Abby's case, let's just root your whole entire family, which she had 3 kids and was pregnant at the time, I believe. And let's just give them a home. You can work here. You can do this. You know, I mean, that's just one of the beautiful things that come out of the working group, and it's constantly changing. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have to create this group again, because what has happened in the past is not going to be the same what can happen in the future. So we have to keep up with it. We have to understand what's going on with our Indigenous communities to really make change and to really create these jobs that, you know, to like Paulette and I have been saying, occupy these spaces. These students are occupying these spaces in these college universities and these institutions that have, you know, that are there for us to like learn, but our voice is changing their structure, their curriculum. Our need, voicing our need has changed their paradigm. And now we are graduating and we're creating these jobs in NCAR, NASA, you know, all these other USGS, all these other acronyms that are government agencies that are out there, and we're occupying these spaces. We're creating these spaces. And so this is something, you know, like the advice I'd give to the new incoming students, or the graduates that are coming out, is just stick with us and we'll figure something out. Because right now, obviously, if you're going to ask that question, there's a need. And so for us to put this together, we can create how we can solve that need. You know, this is to serve you, not to serve us personally. This is a collective to serve us all. So that's where I'll end it. Yeah.
Paulette?
And for me, it would be be very intentional with what you plan to do with an academic education. Because when I came in, I had one intention, and then coming out, I have a different goal almost. And so for me, it's like food sovereignty, food security. You know, and then building a garden, and with the extreme weather events we have in Oklahoma, you know, we had heat, we had hail, we had heavy down, you know, and with the COVID, I found out that food security is even more vital. So, you know, we have a subterranean greenhouse. We're trying to figure out how to grow food year round and try to, you know, help the community be sustainable in a way in an emergency that we were not prepared for, quite frankly. And so that's one of the things that I'm wanting to share, is that be aware of what your community needs are and what you intend to do with that piece of paper. Because when times are tough and things go crazy, like COVID has shown us, money can't money can't help you. Community can, and food can. So being connected again to our environment, our tribal communities, supporting the traditional foods and protecting those traditional foods, because I know that the COVID has caused fishermen not to be able to hunt, fish, hunters not to be able to, or gatherers and hunters not to be able to do those things. And it's created a potential long-term food security issue. So, I mean, for me, it's be very intentional, know where you want to go with a piece of paper, like, you know, an academic career. Be prepared to change, be flexible, be dynamic, be willing to shift and change your goals, because you don't want your heart broken, for one, but for two, you know, that's a survival mechanism. Mm-hmm. And so for three, remember why you're doing this. Remember why you're going to school. If it's just for you, that's one thing, but if it's for community, recognize how what you do is supposed to reflect and give back to the community, however that looks. If it's service, if it's education, if it, you know, teaching, or if it's government, if it's policy, whatever it is, be prepared to do something that you were not prepared for, I guess. And so, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And I just got a text from somebody that says, can I comment? So if you want to go ahead and comment. I don't know who just texted me. I don't have the number saved or name saved. So go for it.
Yes, please. Please comment.
Hi, this is Alexis Walker, and I'm from the Nez tribe, and I'm on our EOC team, our emergency occupation for the COVID. But I'm listening, but it's so hard coming back into the community when you know, have a degree, and it's hard. Like right now we're dealing with you know, because we're having to switch over to all our Zoom meetings, all of our lifetime meetings, and it is hard here working with our older community to even our tribal members to even change their thinking of where we need to go. So I totally would have to change it to understand that, you know, when you go back in the small communities, it's hard to work. You know, I went to high school and I came home and I came home with the big idea that, oh yeah, 10 years ago when I was there, it would change. It hasn't. I'm back now and I'm in my 40s and it hasn't changed since my 20s. So it's very, you know, it's disheartening and it's hard. You know, you get the graduates, people who come out, you know, and it's like you think you want to go back and help your communities, but it's a whole, you got to understand that you're trying to change people who haven't used computers or even want to get with the software. Like my tribe right now, I was in Florida 20 years ago on this Springbrook software and they still haven't implemented it. So we were struggling during this COVID to even hook up, even teach our older people how to learn computers, to even work away from, you know, this. It's a whole different world now we're dealing with this COVID, and it has changed us. But I'm glad my sister Dia
Lex, you're breaking up.
invited me, you know, I'm
Lex, you're breaking up. And that's my sister.
I wanted to get.
So thank you for your comments. And I don't have her work number saved, but that's my sister, so thank you. Any last comments, questions before we depart?
I'd just like to say that I think we've got tremendous opportunities here. I think everyone's comments were right on target. There's a lot of work, and as our last individual, Alexis, pointed out, it's hard work. And I think everyone on this call will admit we're talking about some hard work. It's not difficult, but that is all the more reason we need to come together and support each other. And I think that's really what we can do. I think we should be working with our, you know, regional climate science centers. You know, there are just so many ways that we can really have a positive impact. And again, I like that metaphor. We need to occupy some spaces where previously we've been excluded. And so let's get in there and get to work. It's going to be hard work, but I think everyone will understand after watching this. There's a kind of energy here that I think can be infectious. So let's keep that energy up. We need that good energy.
And one quick thing, I want to thank your sister for bringing that up, because going home is hard. I mean, especially the more education you have, the harder it is. And it's not well received. I mean, I'm in Oklahoma, there's a higher assimilated Indian, context here, and we're a saturated market of educated Indians. So it's even harder to get a work because you're competing against hundreds of other educated natives. And we don't want to leave. None of us want to leave. And so like for me, I just had to adjust what I could do and what I couldn't do, and just find that sweet spot. And food is the only thing I can, I've got this great education and climate and so on and so forth. But if I'm going to live in Oklahoma, I have to downplay so much and slow it way down. But in the meantime, I can inspire as many Native students as possible to be empowered and to go out and do these things, because, the generation above me, and they're kind of stuck in a way because of the history that they survived, and then their parents were boarding school students, and even the generation just above me, we're all boarding school students. So, my generation and those down are the first time we've had some opportunity to not suffer a trauma at the same time of trying to survive and adjust and grow and be empowered. And so, however, that's going to look different for different people in different places. And, I just want to say, if I'm here to hear anybody, if they need to visit and talk or have questions, so please know I'm available as a friend, a mentor, whatever. And if there's anything I can do to help, I'll do it.
Thank you, Paulette. And thank you everybody for joining us. Our next gathering will be on June 11th at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We will send out that information in the next few days. And if you need to reach out to any of us, our contact information is on the screen right now. And Himakas Katsiayo to everybody for joining us today and sharing your energy. And take care until we see each other again.
You bet.
Yep. Thank you.
Yahweh, thank you very much.
Thank you all.